Welcome to Shred's Takes, everyone. I'm Mike Shredder and joined by my neighbor at home, Sam Hofstetter. He was on a while ago. We talked a lot about, the NFL draft when, the 49ers were even considering Mac Jones back then. So that's how long ago it's been since I've had Sam on. But, we're going to talk a little bit about the New York Giants free agent acquisitions because the Giants came off a successful year, I would say, in the NFL. They got the second round and, they got beat up pretty bad by the Eagles, but had a good season overall. And then we're also going to talk about he's done a bunch of stuff working for Boston College. And so we're going to talk a lot about that as well. So, Sam, thanks for joining the podcast again. It's good to see you.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed our last episode, even though it was about 2 years ago. But I very much enjoyed talking sports with you. So thanks for having me on.
Of course. Let's get started, man. Talk a little bit about, your thoughts about the Giants free agent acquisitions. How do you think that's going to help them improve from, I would say a successful year this year. I think, Brian Daboll did an incredible job this year. And, I like the acquisitions they got. I think Waller is great. The linebacker they just got, obviously those are going to really help them. But I do want to hear, what are your thoughts about the acquisitions? And then what do you think they need to do in the draft in order to shore up their team for next season?
All the points you just said were very much true about the Giants. They had a very successful season in my eyes as a Giants fan. I think our expectations were somewhat middle of the pack. Maybe 6 or 7 wins would be better than usual. So the fact that they made the playoffs and got a playoff win is more than exceeding expectations. The second year GM, Joe Schoen, has done a lot this offseason. And this is not coming from a biased Giants fan. I think there has been a lot of free agency movement, and I think the Giants are definitely in the top 5, maybe 3 when it comes to most active, signings and movement around their roster. So generally speaking, the Giants probably have 3 or 4 crucial needs that they need to address in order to make that big jump, like maybe the Eagles did when they acquired a wide receiver like A.J. Brown. So first and foremost, the Giants definitely need a number 1 wide receiver. They have pretty much yet to address that. I think even with all the signings, they still are missing that piece. And I think that's going to be something they'll target in the first round of the draft, if not later rounds, or maybe potentially a trade like the A.J. Brown situation. So we'll see. Outside of that, they did sign a bunch of receivers for depth. None of them are, too flashy names, but I think signing like a Jamison Crowder or I'm trying to think of who's new to them. I think Paris Campbell from the Colts is a new addition. So 2 names just, kind of under the radar going to be Giants. So there'll be a lot of competition for the wide receiver room. So that's definitely good. Outside of that, signing Darren Waller is huge, especially considering the wide receiver market isn't too good right now. Most people are saying to sign DeAndre Hopkins, which is kind of tricky right now. So going out of your way to get Darren Waller was a very smart and honestly not really looked at move by the majority of the league. So very smart by the Giants. That could be a number 1 wide receiver, even though he's technically a tight end. And then you mentioned the linebacker. I think his name is Bobby Okereke. He was a Colt for the last 4 years. Very good. I would argue he's a top 10 linebacker. The Giants have not had a linebacker in forever, so just having anyone just to stop the run is very much a need of theirs. And also, I looked into him. He has only missed 2 games his entire career. So I think the GM Joe Schoen once said they very much look for dependable players, not like they will obviously go for the talent like a DeAndre Hopkins, but given his injury history, he might not be someone they're looking at. Or Odell Beckham, for example, is another name. They like Okereke because he's very reliable, good, and stays healthy. So I think the Giants have made some pretty good moves. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so in terms of the draft, I guess you can, pivot off of what I'm talking about here. I look at, the wide receiver core is definitely one thing, but I definitely think that anything to address their run defense, which was not very good last season. Their pass defense was fantastic, but when you go against teams like the Eagles, who are really good in the run, they were really bad. I mean, most teams were against the Eagles, but that's number 1. I would say number 2 is their offensive line has gotten better, right? Anthony Thomas, I like a lot, right? I think he's a very, good offensive lineman, but they need to address that, I think, a little bit more in the draft as well, because, I liked the way Daniel Jones played last season. They gave him a huge contract now, which I'd love to get your thoughts on that contract as well. But what from those, where would you say is their biggest, where do you think they need to address the most in the draft? And then what are your thoughts on Daniel Jones's contract?
So just with the draft itself, like I said, if there is a receiver on the board that they like at pick 25, I think they should go for it. Right now, there's 4 names in discussion. I believe from the top of my head, you have Jordan Addison from USC, Jackson Smith-Njigba from Ohio State. My personal favorite, Quentin Johnson, a 6'4", huge wide receiver from TCU. I really like him. And then Zay Flowers, who actually goes to my college. So I've watched Zay quite a lot. I've actually met him. He's a great guy. Little undersized. That's not a reason why I wouldn't draft him, but based on the Giants' current roster, they have a lot smaller receivers like a Richie James. Sterling Shepard's a little bit on the smaller end. I think their biggest receiver, I could be totally wrong on this, but other than Paris Campbell and Jamison Crowder, who I do not think are at any means tiny, but I think Isaiah Hodgins is a pretty good acquisition they got. But outside of that, they do not have that big traditional 6'2" and taller, number one outside threat. So I think addressing that would be very much key. If those 4 receivers are off the board, then I think the biggest need they need to address is either inside linebacker, like you're saying, even though Okereke is a great day one starter. It's good to have depth. So there are a couple names. I think there's the guy from Clemson who's pretty good. I do not know his first name. I think his last name is Simpson. He's a strong prospect. Personally, if receiver was not their way of drafting, I think they very desperately need to address the secondary. I think this year's draft is very deep in corners and safeties. So I think just, again, addressing that would be huge. And Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator, loves secondary players. He'll blitz them all over the place. So I think if there was some guy on the board, I think Wink will give the nod to Joe Shane, and maybe they'll draft a corner.
Blitz guy.
Big blitz guy. And then going to your second question about Daniel Jones. So I have this interesting perspective on it. I like the signing, and I actually do like the money that he received from both sides of it, because yes, present day, it might be a little steep, and it's 4 years. However, if you look at the future for free agency as it relates to quarterbacks, I'm just going to list a couple names that I think we can both agree are probably going to get higher paid contracts than Daniel Jones, and their contracts are coming in the next 2 years. You have Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Tua, if he stays healthy. I think those 4 individuals on their own are probably worth 45 plus, even though I know Mahomes is in that ballpark too, but his contract was signed before they increased the salary cap. So the quarterback market's just going to keep going up and up. So I think on the back end of this deal, maybe in 2024 or 5, I think the $40 million a year is actually pretty fair. I think right now that middle tier is like 35 million. So maybe an extra 5 million for Daniel Jones is fine. 5 years from now, at 40 million, 45 million might be the norm. So I think they got him at a fair price.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Yeah, because I keep on forgetting the salary cap actually does adjust quite significantly in the NFL each year. Does in the NBA as well. But what are your expectations then for the Giants so far, at least for next season? What do you think? I mean, I think that Daniel Jones made a lot of progress, more because I think Brian Daboll really, honed him in like he kind of did with Josh Allen. Saw a big difference between Josh Allen when he had Daboll as the offensive coordinator versus when he did. I know Allen was good last year, but he was better with Daboll. I think most people can agree with that. What did you see from Jones this year that you think can carry over into the future that makes him worthy of that contract?
Yeah, so as it pertains to Daniel Jones specifically and Brian Daboll as a head coach, I used to make this joke when Brian Daboll did get hired as the Giants coach. I know I can say this for certain now, and when he got hired, Josh Allen is obviously better than Daniel Jones. But that being said, you cannot teach 6'5". So Daniel Jones and Josh Allen are both extremely large, mobile quarterbacks who both know how to throw the football pretty precisely. I know Josh Allen is obviously statistically and career winning percentage much better than Daniel Jones, but it is fascinating to see how Brian Daboll has kind of used the playbook that he used for Josh Allen on Daniel Jones. Obviously, different quarterbacks, different needs, but I do think Daniel Jones is obviously a big turning point for him is his interceptions. He was probably he had the most turnovers, I think, every year for his first 3 years. Fumbles, especially, but interceptions weren't great. I'm not sure what the fumbles were this season. I want to say less than 3, pretty good. But I do know he only threw 5 interceptions, which is phenomenal speaking compared to, I think he threw at least an interception a game last year, or the year prior. So this season, much big improvements on that department with turnovers. And also just, I think Daniel Jones is a lot more composed. It's kind of silly to say that he is a veteran, but he has been in the league for 4+ years. So I think going into this 5th season in his contract, I do think there's going to be that jump. I don't know how high that jump will be, but I do think it puts him into that semi-elite quarterback discussion. Even like a Kirk Cousins, for example, he has so many weapons to work with. And I think Daniel Jones personally is a much better quarterback than Kirk. And so it'll be fascinating to see, once the Giants address those receiver needs and just talent, bringing more talent into the building, I do think Daniel Jones, just as a talent, will surpass everyone's expectations they had.
Yeah, I'm excited as a Giants fan to hear that, but I think it's funny when I hear people say Kirk Cousins is better than Daniel Jones because the playoffs kind of proved that to not be true. I would say, and you can say okay, the Giants have a better defense, but the Vikings have a much better roster. We're a higher ranked team, and Daniel Jones really, in my opinion, outplayed Kirk Cousins in 2 games. And they just couldn't put the ball in the end zone. The first one really as much. That second one they were able to. But let's shift over a little bit. So speaking of football, right? You've been able to work a little bit, or at least do some production stuff for BC football a little bit. Kind of tell me a little bit about. There's kind of 2 questions I have with that. First, like what inspired you to get involved with that, and the second thing is how do you feel like that's helped your knowledge of football as a big fan of football as you are?
So a couple of things there. I guess as it pertains to my job at BC, the reason why I wanted to take a chance and work for BC's broadcast control room, I'm a big fan of 2 things. I love visual storytelling and learning, and I also love what I like to call organized chaos. So it's kind of a silly term, but just follow with me here. I think working in a control room that's like so many moving parts, one person's job as a producer, another as a director. There's probably like 50 to 100 people involved in every single televised broadcast you'll see of any sport. And it's fun to be one piece of that greater, production or, story that they're trying to tell. So obviously as a student, my job is probably a little bit lower on the totem pole, but I think as we like to talk in production, like your job, everyone's job is important because if you mess up your job or you're not on, the same wavelength as everyone else, then it hurts the team. So it's good to work with other people. There's a lot of problem solving and challenges that come with the job, but I love the adrenaline and the excitement of being at sporting events, especially live, being there in studio or on a field. And then as it pertains to football, unfortunately, I actually have not worked a BC football game only because when I actually started officially working, because the first 2 months I shadowed some of the producers and whatnot. So I have attended the football games from the perspective of like a shadowing, intern or whatnot, but actually like hands, getting my hands dirty, doing work. by the time I was pretty much like cleared to start working, it was right around the final week of the season. So they were just like, hey, like you can work it, but you maybe try hockey or basketball while it's, just starting up, because those productions are quite insane. I mean, I could talk to you about football productions. It's every sport has, obviously broadcast cameras, and, depending on how big said production is, more cameras are needed. So like, for example, I actually do camera for hockey. So BC has a really good ice hockey team, and they have these giant camera rigs that are probably more expensive than probably like 10 people's tuitions combined. But no, it's true that those cameras are not cheap. But they use them for the televised NESN or ESPN, whatever broadcast they have going on. And my job is just to make sure someone will be in my ear saying, "Hey Sam, like I need you to get me the coach, or I need a player on the ice so I can put on the jumbotron or on the TV broadcast." So that's a fun job. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's only 4 to 6 cameras for hockey. It's a very small production in that sense. But if you compare it to football, you have the pylon cam, the ref cam. If you work for the NFL, you have the sky cam or whatever you call it.
Right.
It adds up. There's probably 50 to 100 cameras for football.
Interesting.
Whereas hockey, for at least BC, is only a handful. And basketball is somewhere in the middle. Like you have those cameras that are like under the basket for like replays and foul shots and whatnot. So yeah, it's fun to see like it all come together. And it's also really cool too. I can get into some stories in a second, but a lot of the people who work at BC full time, like so not students, they freelance. So what I mean by that is there's a couple people who are like the directors and producers at BC, so they have like an office where like they come into work every day. Whereas there's someone else who might come into a game or two for BC, and then they'll work a Celtics game, and then they'll be at Fenway Park because their job is very like utilized elsewhere. Let's say they do like audio can be used in so many ways. So they're like a jack of all trades, which is really cool. I think one name I can give you his first name. I don't actually know his last name, but there's this guy who I'll be operating the camera for the hockey games, and there's an organ next to me, typical standard organ. This guy comes in, his name's Ron, very nice guy, phenomenal at the organ, doesn't need sheet music. He'll just go in, play his little songs, and then leave. And he'd keep doing this like, every other week. And I'm like, "Hey Ron, like what's up? Like, do you work here?" Like I was trying to get to know him more, and turns out he's actually the organ player for the Boston Celtics for the last 30 years. So
no way.
So like every time like Jalen or Marcus Smart's dribbling the ball up court, and you hear the bump, 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 like that's him. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like I'm just working with you and eating lunch with you. So that's fun. So like stuff like that, I find enjoyable when going into work, because these people are kind of, individuals that, unless you knew them, but like they're not they're not in front of the camera. So they're not on air talent, but they're literally behind the scenes production talent. So these people are very much, when it comes to networking, they know all sorts of people. And, when it comes to getting a job, I think I found some good company. So it's pretty awesome.
Right. I know, at least I've done a little bit of my things, but obviously been mostly on air, but I've done a little bit of production work for like the different broadcastings I've done, including doing a lacrosse game between UMass and Yale this year. And I know you could test it. Like, I know totally what you're talking about, the camera stuff, because I was working the audio inside the production studio. And so I'm hearing the main guy who's going through the entire production going like, "Hey, in camera 5, you need to zoom into these guys after the goal. You need, where's the replay camera at? Like, let's switch over to the graphics for replay." It's an extensive process. I mean, everything as you kind of mentioned has to go together for that to go into play. And I think because a lot of times, I think you could test this. Like people care so much about what the on-air people are doing, and they have no idea what's going behind the scenes. And that actually kind of makes a lot of the story, more so than even just the person saying something. I mean, both jobs are incredibly important, but I think like you can attest that like the storytelling really can get really told through the different things that happen from behind the scenes. I mean, I think you would agree with that, right?
Completely. Yeah. let's just say for a given production, or maybe as it relates to BC, there's probably 1 to maybe 3 on-air talents, whether that's a sideline reporter or a play-by-play guy. Actually, I'll give you a name. So going back to why I'm even doing this stuff, I'm actually taking the journalism minor. I just picked it up during the fall. So econ, finance, and now journalism. So kind of fun. But one of the classes is called Sports and News Broadcasting, and it's taught by this guy named John Mita-Perel. And he happens to be the play-by-play for all basketball games and all football for BC. So like he will teach this class and you get his little knowledge about the industry, and he'll go to work. Like he'll watch the ACC basketball game between BC and Duke, that game that was really close and BC almost upset Duke. He's calling the game. And I always ask him, I'm like, hey man, like what goes into your production? Like I understand that you're given a script and you have certain knowledge about the game that you did on your own, and you have producers and all these different roles that come into that one BC Duke game. But like how many moving parts are involved with his job? And he's an on-air talent. There are probably 15 to 20 people who are involved in that one game for his job specifically. You know, maybe there's a couple researchers who are spending the whole week looking up Duke storylines and roster developments, injuries. You know, maybe there is a player, who's I'll give you a good example. I was just watching the UConn Gonzaga game where UConn dominated. And one of the storylines was that Adama Sanogo, the center, actually is celebrating Ramadan, and he couldn't eat until sundown, which is about halftime of the game. And what's interesting is the game was actually like really close-ish in the sense of like 5 to 10 points. Then he eats at halftime, and then they're up by like 30 plus points. So I just find it funny. Like that's a really good little tidbit that some producer found that information, told the broadcasters, and when Sanogo went to the bench or the locker room during halftime, that's what they talked about when they came back from break. So you don't really appreciate those kinds of storylines or the people involved who found it, but there are tons of jobs where like one person's job is to look on specifically Adama Sanogo and what is going on in his life and what can we talk about. So it's cool to see how many moving parts, like you're saying, are involved. There's probably 95% of production is all behind the scenes, and those 5% of those Stephen A. Smiths and those Mike Breens, they get all the credit, but they respect a lot of the people that help them get up there.
But kind of what sports is about in a sense, sports media is, generally is just, the big team atmosphere. A lot of industries are like that too. I'm not, trying to say they're not, but saying, especially within those kind of broadcast deals, you need the team to work properly to get the job done. It's really interesting because sports is all about, especially team sports, not individual sports like golf or tennis. It's those team sports are the ideas of really, the cohesive unit. And it's kind of interesting to hear from that perspective. I mean, I think we have different experiences, but I'm saying like the idea of having that broadcast production teamwork going together is so interesting. And I think that's great. But I really want to appreciate you for coming on as well. I mean, I know, you're a busy man, we're all busy. So I really appreciate you coming on. I know it's been a while since we've done this kind of podcast. So, you're still in this, it looks like you're still have a kind of similar setup to last time we did it. So, interesting things haven't really changed there. All jokes aside, I really appreciate you coming on, and, we'll definitely, do another episode, hopefully this summer when I'm back home, when we're both back home. So, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And especially when it comes to the NBA, I'm sure we'll do a little episode. Maybe you give me your knowledge, I'll tell you what's going on behind the scenes, and we'll talk. So it'll be fun.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, thank you so much. And for those folks, make sure to subscribe to Shred Sticks. Sam, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.